when Mitch McConnell, who really is a Democrat who masquerades as a Republican frequently, when he goes and supports the accommodation for the debt ceiling to be raised and a suspension of the filibuster, it ends up being, he couldn't have known this, I don't think he could have known this, it ends up being that it's the Democrats themselves, with Joe Manchin, who holds the line on this Build Back Better spending orgy of socialist remaking of America, which was estimated to be $2.5 trillion, but actually the budget office says it's more like around $4 to $5 trillion. And Manchin holds the line. And in doing so, what the Republicans didn't even block, one sole Democrat was able to resist. And it's amazing how they hammered on him. And they hammered on him. But this is a point of celebration. He not only didn't break Mercedes, but the one thing you don't want to do in a situation like this is permanently make an enemy out of the swing vote in your own party. And what the staff at the White House did in classic juvenile form, and I'm saying to you, this is all, I'd say by divine providence, this is all God's way of working in the mystery of the details. The spoiled little staffers that work on the Hill were so mad at Manchin that they brought out this blistering screed of personal assault on him, basically making him the wrecker of America and the destroyer of families and hopes. And instead of simply acknowledging that they couldn't come to an agreement, they had to assault him. But what's the net effect of that assault on him? And this is all I'm saying. It's all Christmas. Is good. The net effect of it is, I got it written right here. I got him talking about this. Is that he describes what they did to him as an attack on him, meaning that he looks at the way in which they assaulted him, Mercedes, and he is interpreting that as evidence. Listen to what he says in his own words. I'm just fumbling around trying to find this because it's so important you hear it. They figured, surely to God, we can move one person. This is Manchin, his analysis. We can badger and beat up one person. Here's what he went through, badgered and beat up. This is not the psychological profile of somebody you're cultivating to be on your side for the next 3 years. Surely we can get enough protesters to make that person uncomfortable enough to be badgered and beaten into submission. Well, guess what? I'm from West Virginia. I'm not from where they come from. So now he's getting a little bit of that West Coast, East Coast. Now he's in the hinterland, kind of like Middle America. Sure. 30 points high went for Trump in West Virginia. They just beat the living crap out of people and think they're going to be submissive, period. Well, it doesn't work with a West Virginian. Woo!
Yeah.
He's actually identifying himself almost with MAGA language.
Yeah. Well, I think this is classic, too, in terms of what we're seeing lately with Democrats, blue dog Democrats like himself, moving more into that Republican conservative umbrella because of the bullying tactics. I mean, we see it over and over again from the left of just bullying, intimidation, lawsuits, fear-mongering. And to your point, so Trump carried West Virginia on Election Day by 38.9 points. So he answers not to Nancy Pelosi, not to President Biden. He answers to his voters who put him in office. He knows if he wants to stay there, he's got to vote the way they want him to vote. And
so Ocasio, Brain Freeze Cortez, she says, and this is kind of an interesting first, response. She said he doesn't understand that it's not fair. Listen to her understanding and assessment of how the government works. It's kind of scary. She doesn't understand how government works. We represent more people than they do, meaning the Congress actually is representing more people than the senators do. We're representing more people in where I'm from, for instance, her district, which has like 700,000 people or so that vote, versus him, not realizing he represents like 1.3 million people in West Virginia. So What she doesn't understand, she's saying this is the will of the people, and it's not fair that he could thwart that. And here's the fundamental lesson that I guess she didn't catch in civics. Congress is up for election every 2 years for one reason, because they represent what the founders said was the boiling water point of the country. So that when the country has its passions aroused every 2 years, rather than a civil war or violence, they could ventilate their opinions through the congressional representatives and the House of Representatives. And every 2 years, it could reflect the current passion and disposition and priority of the American people. The Senate is deliberately not reelected every 2 years for that reason. They don't want them caught up in an overthrow of temperament. They're 6 years for the very purpose of elongating the time of contemplation so that radical sentiment and passion that spills over in the teapot of the Congress goes into the cooling chamber of a cup of tea that has 6 years before you have to really deal with a reelection. So the Senate actually is a more reflective body. And the fact that the radical left wants to jam their agenda from federalizing elections to overhauling and collapsing the budget to opening up the borders to shutting down individual companies and freedoms, they govern like they've got the passion and the backing of America. But there's only 7 or 8 seats between the Republicans and the Democrats. That is shocking. When you only have 7 seats as a margin, not 50, not 60, not 100, like they may end up with in midterms in reverse order, then you govern like you don't have a mandate for your agenda. You govern like you've got to really represent the American people. You've got to move more to the middle because your opposition is darn close to the number of votes you've got. Hey, if you haven't seen me around as much on the platform recently, it's because all the explosive, incendiary things that I want to say, the Lance Rants, are on the podcast. Go to lancewallnau.com/podcast and hear the unbridled utterance